Okay, I think we should be recording.
All right. Well, welcome to the fourth and final installment of our Future of Improvement series. Today we're talking about data and opportunity. If it's opportunity or waste, sorry. Okay, so to go through a few things from an agenda standpoint, if you have any questions throughout the series, feel free to use the little Q&A or raise your hand in the chat window. Drop some questions in there. We'll go through kind of introductions about what the mission's all about and who we are, talk about the world of data and what it looks like today, some benefits, potential pitfalls, the outlook of what that looks like in the future, and some tips and tricks of what data can look like from an opportunity and waste standpoint. At the very end, we'll wrap it up here with a 15-minute Q&A session and kind of go through what our series was all about. So a little bit about our mission. Effectively, this is something that we wanted to focus on the future of improvement and the tools and techniques that are available across the different industries, essentially. Whoops. But really what we're here to talk about today is to provide some insight and value to everyone on how you can accelerate improvement. And we've done 3 of these already. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So we can probably go into introductions now, Chuck. Thanks. Awesome. My name is Corbin Metz. I am currently in South Dakota, USA, and have about 12 years experience in operations management and engineering. Currently a managing partner for Coeptus Consulting Group, where we focus on industrial service providers and manufacturers to help accelerate their transformations, whether that's product development or any kind of other improvement from an operational standpoint. So I have my partner Chuck here as well. I'd like to introduce him. Bye, Chuck.
Thanks, Corbin. Yeah, Chuck Adams, as Corbin mentioned. I guess I'm her Chuck, teasing you. And I've been working in engineering and minor operational type roles for over 10 years now, and as well as a recovering programmer, as well as a business focused person as well. Cut our teeth a lot in the aerospace, automotive, video game development worlds, etc. And I'm also one of the managing partners of Coeptus Consulting Group. Again, like Corbin said, where we really focus on industrial manufacturing and service providers in the areas of performance and operational improvement, and again, product development. And that's a little bit about me. I'd love to hand it over to our other panelists, Eleanor.
Hi, everyone. So my business is called iSquare. So I focus on process improvement as well as having a background in food technology as well. So I've got about nearly 20 years experience now, showing my age, in food manufacturing, process improvement, quality and product development. So what we found when we were putting together this workshop is that we had a lot in common in terms of a real drive to see improvement and match that with data and technology and basically utilize what the new things are that are available and help businesses improve using that technology. So it's really exciting, and it's been a real privilege to do this workshop series with Coeptus Group, Chuck and Corbin. So looking forward to today, a very exciting topic.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Oh, can you guys hear me okay? Little echoey there for a second on my end. Okay, so we'll just get right into it. We're going to talk about the world data here. Looking back and kind of thinking about how to wrap this around, we have different levels of maturity that currently exist today, the way that they get applied in business, and how useful that data even is. Effectively talking about the level of maturity and the different types of systems that are out there. There's a lot of things that exist in different formats. And because we have so many legacy systems that might be out there in the industrial world, There are some challenges that we might see in the area of data today, where we have different opportunities to slice and dice, if you will. They come in different forms, and ultimately that can provide a challenge to the different formats that are available out there, and the systems that kind of integrate together to tell that like data story. So I know, Chuck, you have some experience here in the different structured and unstructured types of data. Do you want to share some of your insight?
Sure, yeah. Structured versus unstructured data. There's a lot of different definitions out there for what those can mean, down to the nitpicky details. Typically, structured data is usually what you would think with an Excel sheet, is what I tell a lot of people. It's typically very structured with different columns and rows as records, right? Or unstructured data can be dictionary as in the dictionary variables, or keywords that go together, or customer text fields. And also known a lot of times that we've seen that in things like big data. So when you think about Amazon, et cetera, a lot of the things that they work with is unstructured data, but they also work with a lot of structured data as well, where structured data is more, you can see it a lot in manufacturing shops, or very, like I said, transactional type of rows. So a little bit about that.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Ultimately, the application of all that kind of data and the different types of formats that's available in has really permeated across a lot of different types of businesses and industries in the last few years. And there's quite a few different formats available for analytics and how you kind of take insight from that data, with a lot of rise in data science and exploring that particular expertise with emerging technologies and everything that's out there available now. I know, Eleanor, you actually have some more modern experience in the data science area, since you're studying some of it right now.
Yeah, so I am a data science student at the moment, which has been basically was prompted by my real interest in Industry 4.0 and being able to really take advantage of the new technologies that are starting to be available that enable you to improve your operations and understand more about what's going on, so you can have good targeted improvement. The other thing that's just amazing in the last 5 years is the rise of software as a service across all areas of business, and it really presents some interesting challenges and opportunities around how you capture all that data, what's important out of that data, and then what do you do with it. So it's a really exciting area to be. But I think one of the things that we talked about when we were putting together this workshop was just that there is the opportunity for so much waste if you're not really thinking hard about how you're using these various technologies.
Yeah, how you use the technology, and then like you said, kind of the increased volume of data that we're seeing out there provides a lot more opportunity in the traceability department, but it also makes insights a little bit more challenging to really extract information that's going to help you make strategic decisions from that. And one way you can you can kind of slice and dice it, or think about it, if you will, is creating boundary conditions can really help some of that data insight make sense by kind of putting that that kind of film around it. It allows it to come together and paint a picture that you would not have if you didn't have that kind of systems thinking in place before, like some of the past workshops we talked about. But to talk about some of the benefits, I want to pass it off to Chuck.
Great, thanks, Corbin. Let me flip the slide here. So benefits, data, you have it. Opportunity to waste, right? What are some of the great things that you can get out of more data, especially as it's becoming more digitized? And what we have here on the page here is really kind of a breakdown of, you can get a lot of insights, qualitative and quantitative. Now, a lot of times people think of data as in really quantitative terms, and that's very true. But you also gives you a better feel of what's going on out there for better insights. And that can lead to, as we see up here in the top right, faster and better decision making. Analysis paralysis, we've always heard that term. And really what can happen sometimes with a lack of information and a lack of data and insights is it can really paralyze your business decision making. And so having that data in the right format and at the right place at the right time can help your organization make better decisions. Another rise that's occurring, and keep in mind this isn't a completely exhaustive list, is the diagnosis and prognosis of issues, products, or processes on the line. Yes, I see the gotcha there, but had to put it in there. But with the rise of a lot of data science and emerging technologies, being able to not only diagnose, but create prognosis for business problems or processes, issues, et cetera, that are out in the field is starting to rise up and become more accurate. And that'll enable an organizations to be more efficient than ever, I really believe. And lastly, another one is around visibility. If you can have that data really come up through your organization very accurately, again, right place, right time, it gives you better feel and, like I said, visibility, which feeds into the decision making of what's really going on in your business, as well as helping with a lot of business leaders reduce cognitive bias. And I know, Corbin, you're one that really wanted to touch on that briefly with cognitive bias. I thought it was a really good point. I think you're on mute. I know.
Yes, you're right. Ultimately, I read an article a little while back, and it was basically saying that in our current state of business, we have 4 generations that are working together, and because of the really broad amount of history that exists with all of this, from a technology standpoint and from a knowledge and transfer standpoint with age groups, it really can affect the way that you see the data and how you approach some of those problem solving things when it comes to challenges. So ultimately, just it's an awareness that it allows you to see that these things are happening in case of some a misrepresentation of the data that is out there today.
Great. Thanks for that input, Corbin. Definitely. So all of these factors that we see here on the right, again, not an exhaustive list, but it gives us a good idea of the insights that can help drive some of these, again, better decision-making, some of these factors, diagnosis, prognosis, and visibility throughout the organization. Now, these are some of the benefits that you can get from having a lot of data or analyzing it right, but there's another big question, and something that we fell into a lot, I know Corbin and I throughout our careers, is the potential pitfalls with having data, whether it's overload or not enough, right? And again, not a completely exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that we have found as potential pitfalls that you need to be watching out for. So to go around is only observing the data, but not using. A lot of executives sometimes will, oh, this is great that I can see this and have that visibility of that data, but they don't necessarily use it to help influence their decision making. Like Corbin talked about with cognitive bias, they still might go with their gut instead of saying, here's what the real, clean data actually says. Also, too much or not enough governance. So one of the things we found with some organizations, especially if you're dealing with the ITAR or export control laws, you end up finding that there's almost too much governance. There's almost too much lockup and key, right? And that can cause a lot of time issues with accessing data or flowing it down. But at the same time, not enough can also be bad as well. If you let people go off and just run and do their own thing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Democratizing data can be seen good, but only in the right context. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of people doing very similar things and doing rework, reinventing the wheel, and that can cause a lot of waste. Other things are costs, which could be not only just having unneeded databases, but there's also environmental costs, which we've talked about in the previous, the past, right? You can go straight to digital, but over time, as we grow and more with data out there, you're going to find that more power is going to be needed to take care of all that data, right? Another one is format, and this is a big one. A lot of data comes in formats that aren't necessarily digestible by certain groups or certain people. And so that can be a problem if you bring something to somebody data-wise, but it's not really set up in the right format. That causes a lot of problems, and it causes a lot of extra lead time to get insights that you need to make the better decisions, as an example. Unstructured big data, this is another one that, while it's a good thing to have it in the right context, if you don't put good wrappers around that, or you don't look to seek the right insights out of it, it can become this big behemoth that's really hard to deal with. And lastly, the one that we've seen, especially when we talked about the different generations in the previous slide, is trust. A lot of new technologies in our experience can throw people of all ranges, but usually we found in the older generations, there's this lack of trust. You know, they've always had this way of doing things. And so developing trust throughout all ages, mind you, is really important as well. And it can become a pitfall that if you have that data and you give it to somebody on the floor, they might say, oh, I don't believe it because of this over here, right? So trust is a big one as well, and a potential pitfall you have to look out for among all your groups in your organization. So summing all that up is your data can lead to great insights, but you have to mitigate data risk with these on the page, among others as well. Anything else from anybody before we move on? Oh, okay, great. So moving on, here we go. And I think this is being passed over to Eleanor.
Yep.
Great, thanks, Eleanor.
So the world of data is moving fast. We were talking about when we prepared this that there's emerging technologies, and they included blockchain, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. But actually we realized that they're becoming mainstream, and actually there's a whole wave coming behind them now of data technologies. But you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning are really interesting because they look to derive insight without human intervention, without human analysis, and it's more about the structure of how the analysis algorithm has been put together, that then you get insight out of it without that human intervention. So it's really interesting because it kind of goes back to that trust and how the algorithm's set up and what bias there is in your data as well. Edge and cloud computing is really exciting. You know, it's about doing data analysis and processing at the point of measurement rather than going back to a centralized area where you're going to then analyze the data, put it in a digestible format. So a good example might be factory floor analysis, where you have sensors on the floor and actually they're giving you insight in real time in front of what you're doing. And robotic process automation, where you've got potentially some fairly clunky semi-manual processes that you do on a computer that you can actually automate the existing process, which I think is that digitalization, or you can go through a full process where you do complete automation and go down the digital transformation route. And they're the technologies that are now becoming more mainstream, dare I say, or more commonly in place. But behind that, I got a list off Gartner around some of the emerging technologies and data, and some of them were the move from big data to small and wide. So that's really about, especially because of COVID, needing insights from a range of areas, and books like Range by Epstein start to talk about how actually generalists do really well, and having a general picture of how things work can be really useful. There's also around decision intelligence. So actually, how do you make decisions, making decisions more accurate, repeatable, and transparent and traceable? So really capturing that, not just measurements, but also what decisions are being made. I have a good friend in New Zealand who works in the data and analytics area of a very large company, and data and analytics is now a core business function. It's not something off to the side or part of the IT team necessarily. It's actually a really important business-wide function. It also talked about augmented consumers, so consumers that are provided a lot of insight and data and at point of consumption. Some of the examples I can think about personally for myself is like using Google Analytics for my web page, and the fact that that's just provided now, and that's built as part of the software as a service. is having those analytics there. So, you know, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities in data to really understand your situation more, or what you're doing, and enhance those decisions. But I was listening to The Tipping Point, and there was an afterword in that, and it actually talked about how all of this information and all of this data actually means that we tend to rely more on what people we trust recommend, ironically, because we've got so much information that actually we're still going to go with people we trust or people that have done it before. So it's really interesting to see how we can bridge that, because you have technologies that can potentially enhance decision making, but actually we're falling back to incredibly analog ways of doing things, which I know personally, I do trust my friends. If people tell me something, then I'll go, oh, well, they think it's good, so that must be good. And I think all of this speaks to needing a really strong data foundation. You've got to have the right data in the right place, in the right format, that's easily digestible. But you've also got to empower your people at the right level. So Chuck talked about governance, so not having too much, but also not having too little, where you don't trust the data because it's basically a data soup, and cybersecurity. So all of these software as a service, you know, we're giving a lot of data potentially to cloud-based services, to online databases. How secure are they really? How do they keep ahead of potentially hackers and things like that in terms of getting into that data is going to be something that becomes more and more important in terms of managing those things. And I think lastly, it's really about how do you get the systems thinking into the data and make sure that you're bridging across your business, so you're not just operating in a silo, but you're actually using that data across your business for insight. And what are those kind of shared insights that you're going to need as a business? And how do you get at them? So how do you make that information available for all the people that need it? And also, how do you decide what people need access to? It's kind of fascinating to me. And I think we talked about it in a previous workshop, but whether you take the approach of you only give people access to what they're allowed to have access to, or you give more free access, and then how do you control that? Do you take stuff away, you know, like, I don't know, potentially sensitive finance data or HR data? So there's a lot to consider, and it's really interesting, and it's also going to be quite challenging. So I'm really looking forward to learning more and seeing how it goes. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add onto this slide?
Yeah, I was just thinking of what you were saying across like bridging different departments. And I think that can also be applied to personal or professional development, you know, having that insight in your function, but then also knowing what the data is and what it means, where it came from, where it's going, and having that insight on whether on the technical side of things so that you can actually add more value in your function. And I think that really has there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're going in that direction.
All right, so I believe, yeah, you're next, aren't you, Corbin?
Yeah.
Intro yourself, and I interrupted you.
So this is perfect timing. I think we'll walk on to how we're looking at capturing whether data is opportunity or waste. And really the way that we kind of thought about it is in this diagram here, like inputting, and the most important step in the beginning is understanding what the purpose is. Understanding that process and knowing that process then is the responsibility of both the business and the IT department or the data department. They have to kind of commingle and kind of storm and norm to understand kind of what it is that they're trying to do. And then they already have that purpose that kind of feeds into their process. Ultimately, data can then come in and help you derive your logic and embed more collaboration between the departments to understand where you can take some risks and where you can kind of go a little bit deeper and be more robust in that development phase. And one way you can do that is by encouraging sandboxing. And ultimately, when we say sandboxing, it kind of means like a little like play sandbox, if you will, that you can allow people to freely experiment and laterally think about what the problems they have are and how they're going to solve them. And data can really help support that. Ultimately, I know Eleanor has some experience of kind of going through that concept phase and how important it is for data and understanding what what the impact of that is. Do you want to share one of your stories maybe?
That's me, right? Just you, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? So I worked in product development for quite a number of years and also in process development. And it's really interesting how you've got to understand your system holistically and build through kind of iteratively what you think you're going to need. And that also applies to data and to systems that you're looking to build. And you really want to have an iterative approach, have a learning approach, and also understand mechanistically what you're trying to do, rather than just apply a layer of data without really thinking about it. And I think one of the other things that's really important when you're developing new technologies or new ways of doing things is having a cross-functional and collaborative approach, as well as having a real focus on the end user. So we employed we've done improvements in the factory floor where the operators on the factory floor were going to have to use technology in a new way to derive insights. And one of the things that was really important was making sure that they understood what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how it would be beneficial to them in terms of allowing more support for them on their top 5 issues. But also then that carried a responsibility with it to making sure that they then captured the data accurately. So I guess the things that are important is making sure that you have a good understanding of the system that you're trying to improve, and be prepared to learn and change along the way as well, as you learn more, and as you learn more about the technologies that you're looking at using as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely great insight. And I think it is important that people feel empowered to make those decisions, but then we also have the challenge of the discipline that's required to keep data kind of habitable and insightful. So Chuck, I know you have some experience, maybe a couple of stories or two in the standardization area and how important format and systems integration is to collaborate cross-functionally. Do you want to share some insight there?
Very briefly, a good example was a couple years ago, I was working on a process, I wouldn't say a process improvement project. I was the module owner for a particular engine line. And one of the issues that we had found is that when you're looking at data around, a good example was part defects, right? Figuring out when something came in from the field and you inspected it, the different shops were using different definitions or different language, and as well as different ERP systems, which is a whole other problem in of itself. But they were using those different ERP systems in different language. And so one of the big projects that I helped lead was really focused around standardization, getting it into a standardized format so that you could derive insights from it across many different shops. I mean, there were shops in Texas, shops in Singapore, there was a shop in Malaysia, a shop in the UK, and all of them were speaking these different languages. So bringing up a universal standard and coming to agreement and collaborating between each other about what the standardized data would look like made a big difference in the long run. So that was just one quick story.
Yeah, and it can have a huge impact. So it's absolutely worth talking about. And the more you can capture those opportunities and reduce the waste, the better off you are. So just wanted to pass it on to Eleanor to kind of wrap up our discussion here today.
Yeah, so this is actually quite a crazy moment, really. I was thinking 7 weeks ago we started doing this workshop series, and I've personally learned a lot. I've really enjoyed the collaborative process of creating content with people in a different part of the world, with really different but also similar experience. And the aim of this series was really to create value and consider the ideas around what the future of improvement does look like and how does technology integrate into that in particular. So we covered a few different topics, which I'll just briefly go into. So the first topic we did was improvement across industries. And given our diverse backgrounds, we looked at food manufacturing, which is my background, but also Chuck's. And then we also compared and contrasted that to aviation, and then looked at what the trends were that were affecting those industries and others, and really considering what that future looked like. And that segued nicely onto the next topics in the series. So the next one we did was systems thinking, which was examining what systems thinking actually is and how this can be beneficial to improvement, particularly in times of intense change and technology disruption. And then the next topic was digital transformation, which is just amazing how it's accelerated, particularly in the last year. COVID's really driven a lot of change. There's a lot of businesses now looking at e-commerce that potentially weren't in the past, and very different ways of doing things. And really looking at the extent of this as a business change and the benefits and potential pitfalls. It's not easy to transform your business when you have an existing business already that has legacy systems, that has different ideas of how people do things. And it's such an amazing opportunity. It's like data that we talked about today. It's got amazing opportunity, but it's also got a lot of challenges and the potential for waste, because unless your business was streamlined to begin with, you're going to have a bit of mess to clean up and a bit of ambiguity to have to deal with. And finally, today's presentation discussed data, which is, I think, a topic that's close to all of our hearts and has been, my favorite topic to prepare for in the series, although they've all been great. What's really interesting is, like we talked about, the current state of where data is at and the pace of change that's now upon us, looking at things like software as a service, the analytics platforms that are now available that weren't before, and also looking at the value that data can offer, as well as the potential for issues in the outlook like we discussed. So we really hope that we've created some value and really enabled people to get a bit more of a view of what the future of improvement is. Do either of you want to add anything at this point?
I'll add something. No, I just wanted to quickly add, it's been a very fun and enjoyable, a series. I've really, you always go into here, and even though you've been doing things around these subjects for so long, you always just end up learning so much other stuff too while you're really preparing. I've always said, and I encourage people to do this, is that when you're looking to give value or to teach or to do things like that, you end up learning more, I think, than the people that you're teaching. That's what I always say. Like, you end up, because you always end up learning more because you have to really make sure you know it. But at the same time, it's a good exploratory process. So it's been absolutely wonderful working with both of you on this, Corbin and Eleanor. So that was it for me.
Yeah, I was also going to say it's just been a pleasure working on the series, and I hope we provided some valuable insight for the future of improvement and what that could look like, and hopefully it got you thinking if it didn't teach you anything new, and I know I learned a lot as well with working with two awesome partners. So our trialogues have been a pleasure.
Yep. So thank you to you both for the collaboration and the early mornings, late afternoons, and all of the thing that we've done putting it together. It's been great. So shall I start off with a question?
Go for it if you want to.
Okay, so my question is, what's been your favorite topic in the series and why?
Oh, that's a good one. I can go first, I guess.
That is a great one.
That is a great one. I would say that I think my favorite topic was probably digital transformation, even though I know because of personal reasons, I wasn't actually on the actual session. But I really like it because it really focused on really the future in a way of how businesses are going to go in a way, instead of looking at here's how these businesses are and just doing digitization, right? Like really define how you're really going to do things differently and be disruptive, be creative. Of course, I've liked all of them and I've learned so much on all of them. I really just am drawn to the idea of just so much disruption through the next coming decades around digital technology and how it's going to influence not only how efficiently businesses are, but just how they operate, just how they do business in general. So that's mine. Corbin.
Sure. I think that's a really awesome question because it really got me thinking here. And I agree with what Chuck said. Absolutely. I have a soft spot for digital transformation and seeing that physical become something more in the digital space, or really the evolution of that. However, I would say my favorite is probably this topic. And in thinking about why data, opportunity, or waste, I I think I fundamentally always want to optimize personally and eliminate waste. And I know lean is one of and agile process automate or methodologies. The combination of those two things really gets me excited because data is like the fundamental element of that. It's the building blocks of what you can get with digital transformation, and how you can actually make those improvements really insightful and meaningful, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So I think in the essence, that's why I think like data and the opportunity and waste topic kind of is the most exciting, in my opinion. I'm curious to see what your answer is, Eleanor.
I would say it's a tie, so I'm not really making a decision, am I? But I mean, I'm studying data science, so it's probably a clue that I'm pretty into data and the insight that can generate. But also, I really love systems thinking and thinking about how the sum of the whole can have different effects than elements of the system. And I just think it's so important when you're looking at improvement to really consider what your system is and how you're going to derive the most benefit out of it. So I guess it's almost a combination of the two, because you can do some pretty nifty data analysis which looks at the effect of different variables on your system, and certainly machine learning and feature selection also really ties into systems thinking as well. So yeah, I actually think it's probably systems thinking, even though I really love data and am making it part of my career. But yeah.
Interesting. No, as I said, it's hard. I like digital transformation, but I really also like the systems thinking too. So I know we're all like saying our favorites, but the truth is I don't know. I find all these subjects really interesting. So everything else is a close, maybe a tie for second. So there is no least favorite, session that we've done. Politically correct. Anyway.
So yeah, does anyone else have a question?
I don't see any in the Q&A panel. Do we have time for another question?
I would say just one more, looking at the time here. One more big question.
Okay, so I have a question then. It's kind of related to what the future of improvement looks like with data. And what do you think the most helpful, insightful, maybe valuable format of data is going to be in the future?
A format of data. Ooh. I always say that humans So think of it this way. When you read Barbara Minto and the pyramid principle as an example, right? Humans are really, really good at digesting a lot of information, right? If you think about it in the overall scheme of things. So think about visual data, like your eyeball. I mean, think about how much data your eyeball and your ears and everything is taking in all at once. It's quite a bit, right? In that sense. On the other hand, in the book, she also talks about grocery lists. And it's really, really hard to be able to remember a grocery list after 3 to 4 items. Once you start going past that, for the human brain, it's a lot harder to be able to keep track of those additional items. Usually you'll remember maybe the first or second one and maybe, or the last couple, and that's about it. And so when it comes to format of data, it's going to be really interesting to explore and really think about maybe just like the key, KPIs or the key metrics. How can we take a whole bunch of data and synthesize it into a few things, those key things or key indicators or whatever they are, so that we can then wrap our heads around what's going on at a high level and make quicker decisions. So from a formatting standpoint, right, I think for me, I think that's going to be important, is how can you digest something down just to a key few metrics. God, I can't speak today. Is kind of what I'm seeing, because you could get a whole bunch of data on a screen, but sometimes it's really hard for humans to digest a lot of data all at once. So how can we make quick, easy, and efficient decisions with, it sounds weird doing more with less, right? But with the amount of data we're getting, it's going to be really hard to do that, I think, in the future. So.
Right. And actually, as you were saying that, Chuck, it kind of reminded me or made me think of like wearable technology, right? There used to be a lot of hype around, Google Glass and all this stuff to do real-time monitoring of that data. But I think what we realized very quickly is like, yeah, there's a demand for that. But ultimately, I don't know if our technology's there. And I don't know if we have enough insight as to discern what you were saying, like whether that data is valuable or not. How do you like take it into little bits and make sense of it? And there are some really great success stories like Garmin and Fitbit and other like solutions that kind of capture, Apple Watch, like all this stuff is starting to integrate in that space. But it's very consumer focused. So it's very interesting to think about what the future format might be, and how involved that data is going to be from a mining standpoint too, and insights.
It's interesting. On a quick side note, I don't know if Eleanor was going to say something. I don't want to interrupt her, but that's interesting because I was talking with another company that, their founder and everything, that was around those kind of issues around wearable devices for factory floors and for repair floors. There's a big future, I think, for B2B type of businesses, right? Or manufacturing and industrials for things like wearable technology, right? I mean, wasn't it Elon that was like, oh, we'll microchip everybody or something, or right? But it was more than that. It was around, having an AI watch over your work, as an example, not because it's trying to spy on you, but because it's watching your process and maybe you miss something. Because in the end, we're human. Like, we miss things. I miss things, and it happens. And enabling those emerging technologies like AI and machine learning to help you like make better quality and reduce waste and mistakes, as an example. So anyway, rest my case on that.
So my point of view on the future format, in terms of digestibility and understanding, I kind of touched on it earlier in the workshop, but it's going to be around storytelling and people telling people, and that trust, I think, is going to become, well, not going to become, it's always been, I think, the format that trumps all is if someone says something and you trust that person, then you tend to believe that. So it's going to be it's an interesting tension that already exists. And I think technical people everywhere have that tension sometimes when they're trying to get technical change through a business. Maybe their storytelling skills aren't their number one skill, but actually it's really important to engage with people on that level in order to make change happen and get people to see the vision and really buy into what you're trying to sell. So I think it's going to be really interesting in terms of maybe AI versions or machine learning versions of data storytelling as well. I mean, you do see some of that with some of the insights, that sometimes they're done as little anecdotes or little stories, and they are more engaging. So I think a big part is going to be making sure that the data format's engaging.
I think you hit a key topic or a point that I hadn't considered before, but data to me sounds like a common communication, a language that people can then be on the same page. It allows you to do that if you provide that visibility and allow it to be in a structured format and all that kind of stuff. It can, like math, it's kind of universal, right? So, or at least it could be, or music, I guess, would be a good example.
Yeah, music's a great example, actually.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned AI with storytelling. I don't know. I think we got a ways to go, because you guys remember a couple years ago, I think it was Zone Out or some other, with Thomas Middleditch, they had a deep learning AI like read a whole bunch of scripts or something, and then they told it to then gave it a prompt, and then they told it to go write a story like a screenplay script, and they did it, and it was really funny because a lot of it was nonsense. But at the same time, it was very entertaining. So hopefully it gets better. I'm sure it will. If you haven't seen it, go look for it. So I think that's about it. So.
Gotta check that out.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, obviously, thank you to Corbin and Chuck for being such awesome collaborating partners on this workshop series, and thank you to anyone that's tuned into one of the workshops or the series. We really we've all talked about, the aim of it has really been to derive value for people and to get some thought-provoking questions in people's minds about what their future of improvement looks like. We've got our contact details there. If you want to talk to any of us, please do reach out. We really love the topic, so I can certainly speak for myself that I'm always happy to talk about process improvement. It's a passion of mine, as well as what I choose to make my business. So and I'm sure that Corbin and Chuck feel the same. But I'll hand over to you guys to say a few words.
Yeah, I mean, thank you as well, Eleanor. It's been a pleasure, and do reach out, questions, insights. I mean, I like to call myself a self-proclaimed nerd about these types of process improvement technologies and methodologies. So ultimately, love to hear what your thoughts on how the series went or today's session, and look forward to hearing from you guys. And it's been it's a sad day, but it's been a pleasure working with iSquare and Eleanor as well.
Ditto to what Corbin said. It's been an absolute pleasure, Eleanor, working with you and as part of iSquare. And just, it is kind of a sad day. It's hard to imagine that this is the end of this series. And so it went by all just so fast, but very enjoyable. Like Corbin said, I'm also kind of a nerd on this topic, and anything data or engineering related, I'm your guy. Feel free to, contact us. Love to chat more anytime. So, yeah. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks again, everybody that tuned in.